What happens when you take the most competitive people on the planet, strap them into 3,400-pound missiles for 3 hours, and then watch one of them get wrecked with just laps to go? Pure chaos. From bloody foreheads to drivers using their cars as weapons, these are the moments NASCAR never shows in the commercials, but fans never forget. Welcome to Track Reactions, your source for all the stories on and off the track. Please like this video and subscribe to get the latest burnt rubber. Kyle Busch versus Joey Logano, 2017. First up is probably one of the most heated exchanges in NASCAR's recent history. Kyle Busch versus Joey Logano at Cobalt 400 in Las Vegas in 2017. This track has always been a place for drama, but nothing could prepare the fans for what was about to happen on this particular Sunday. Martin Truex Jr. and Brad Keselowski were battling it out for most of the Cobalt 400, with Truex eventually coming out on top for the Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series victory. But that wasn't what made the headlines. It was what happened right after the checkered flag fell that got everyone's attention. On the final lap, Keselowski's car fell back through the field because something had broken in his car. Kyle Busch veered to the bottom to avoid him and made contact with Logano. And that's when everything kicked off. In turn 3, Logano got loose, hit Busch, and sent him spinning through turn 4 and down onto pit row. Absolute disaster for Busch, who was running in the top 5 and ended up finishing 22nd, the last car on the lead lap. He was absolutely livid. As soon as Busch got out of his car, he was on a mission. You could tell by his body language that something was about to go down. He stormed over to Logano, who was still on pit row, threw a punch, and all hell broke loose. Crew members jumped in, and it turned into a full-on brawl that lasted around 18 seconds before officials managed to break it up. Busch walked away with a bloody cut on his forehead, and he didn't hold back when interviewed afterward. "I got dumped," a visibly angry Busch told Fox TV. "Logano flat out drove straight into the corner and wrecked me. That's how Joey races, and he's going to get it." Logano, of course, saw things very differently. According to him, "I was racing hard there at the end. He tried to pin me hard down there in the corner. I was going to spin out, so I tried to chase it up, and he was there. It was nothing intentional, but obviously he thinks that." When asked if any punches landed during the confrontation, Logano smiled and said, "None to me," which probably didn't help cool Busch's temper one bit. Truex Jr. was too busy celebrating his victory to notice what was happening, but when told about it in the post-race interview, he asked, "Who was fighting anyway? Kyle and Joey? Who won?" When told there was blood involved, he joked, "I'm sure NASCAR's gonna love that one." On that note, I should probably go, huh? Kurt Busch's confrontations. Not all confrontations end with punches, though. Sometimes it's the words that cut deeper. And when it comes to Kurt Busch, the older Busch brother, he's had more than his fair share of heated moments. Kurt Busch's temper has been legendary throughout his NASCAR career and has landed him in hot water more times than he'd probably like to admit. His list of confrontations is so long, it's practically a book on its own. But let's look at a few of the most iconic ones. In June 2012, Busch was suspended by NASCAR for a confrontation with Sporting News reporter Bob Pockrass at Dover International Speedway. Pockrass asked Busch if being on NASCAR-imposed probation affected how he raced Justin Allgaier. Busch's response, "It refrains me from beating the shit out of you right now because you asked me stupid questions. But since I'm on probation, I suppose that's improper to say as well. Yeah, not exactly the best way to talk to the media if you want good press." At the time of that incident, Busch was already on probation for running into Ryan Newman's car on pit road at Darlington in May 2012, which kicked off a scuffle between their crews. NASCAR fined him $50,000 for reckless driving in that incident. But perhaps his most famous meltdown came in November 2011 at the season-ending race at Homestead Miami Speedway. Busch broke a transmission early on and unleashed an obscenity-laced tirade at ESPN pit reporter Dr. Jerry Punch, who was waiting to interview him. "Can you get this motherfucker out of my face?" Busch said when Punch attempted to ask him a question. Punch later left after more obscenities were directed toward him. Busch was fined $50,000 by NASCAR and was subsequently released by Penske Racing, bringing an abrupt end to his time with one of NASCAR's most prestigious teams, 1969 Talladega 500 boycott. Sometimes, though, it's not just words or punches that create iconic moments. Sometimes it's entire teams boycotting races, like what happened in 1969 at the Talladega 500. This race is primarily remembered because all of the NASCAR stars from the Professional Driver Association, led by Richard Petty, boycotted the race due to tire failures during tire testing. During practice, drivers reported serious handling problems on their cars. When checking their tires, they noticed they were completely destroyed. The problem was happening throughout the garage. NASCAR was going through a tire war at the time, with competing manufacturers Firestone and Goodyear trying to outdo each other with faster tires, sometimes at the expense of safety. Firestone decided to pull out of the event, letting drivers out of their contracts, but Goodyear decided to stay, hoping to win the tire war. The drivers looked at the PDA, essentially a union, for guidance, and they decided to complain to NASCAR President Bill France about the issues. France, who hated unions in his sport, refused their suggestion to postpone the race until after safer tires could be made, partly because the track was barely completed and he needed his money back as quickly as possible. Tensions reached boiling point when France reportedly told Bobby Allison, "I think you're just afraid to race." According to Allison, driver Leroy Yarborough swung and hit France in the face, putting him on the ground. Leroy then told the drivers nearby, "Boys, pack up your stuff, we're leaving." And most of the PDA, with the exception of Richard Brickhouse, did just that. France worried about fan attendance, so he offered free admission to the 1970 Daytona 500 if they bought tickets to this race. Around 62,000 fans showed up on Sunday. Richard Brickhouse won the race, his only victory in the Cup Series, and the PDA disbanded soon after their boycott. Jeff Gordon versus Jeff Burton, 2010. Things didn't get any friendlier in the 21st century. In 2010, we had one of the strangest confrontations when two drivers with the same first name, Jeff Gordon and Jeff Burton, got into it at Texas Motor Speedway. On lap 191, Martin Truex Jr. brought out a caution after blowing a right front tire and hitting the wall in turn 3. Meanwhile, Gordon and Burton were racing each other for position when the caution flew in turn 1. Burton went down as if to follow Gordon in turn 2, but instead hooked Gordon, and the two hit the outside wall, ending both their races. Gordon, well known for his usually calm demeanor, completely lost it. He got out of his car and walked halfway down the apron of the backstretch towards Burton's car. Burton got out of his car and walked towards Gordon as if to apologize. But before any words were exchanged, Gordon shoved Burton and the two got into a little bit of a fight on the back stretch, with officials having to separate both drivers. The two eventually walked into the same ambulance to the infield care center. Burton later admitted that, "My temper got the best of me and I stood wide open in the gas. I wasn't trying to wreck him, but we got hooked up, and once we did, we couldn't get apart." He was still adamant that it wasn't intentional to wreck Gordon. His goal was probably just to hit Gordon's bumper in frustration, but he hit him at the wrong angle and turned him into the wall. Regardless, Gordon's reaction showed that even the most composed drivers can lose it when pushed too far. Tony Stewart versus Joey Logano, 2013. And speaking of calm drivers who lost it, let's look at Tony Stewart versus Joey Logano in 2013. Logano seems to be at the center of a lot of these confrontations, doesn't he? During the Auto Club 400 in Fontana, California, Tony Stewart attempted to pass Joey Logano on the final restart. Logano blocked Stewart's move, which resulted in Stewart finishing all the way back in 22nd place after running near the front. Stewart was absolutely fuming. As soon as the race ended, he went straight to Logano on pit row, and the confrontation quickly turned physical. They didn't exactly throw punches, but water bottles were thrown and some very harsh words were exchanged. Stewart had to be restrained by crews from Danica Patrick's team as he tried to get to Logano, who had thrown a water bottle at him. Stewart criticized Logano's actions afterwards, stating, "He is a tough guy on pit row as soon as one of his crew guys gets in the middle of it." Kevin Harvick versus Kyle Busch, 2011. And if you thought that was intense, wait until you hear about Kevin Harvick versus Kyle Busch at Darlington in 2011. Regan Smith pulled off an upset and won the Showtime Southern 500 after holding off Carl Edwards on a late restart. But with 4 laps to go, all hell broke loose during a 3-wide situation. Harvick got into Kyle Busch, who in turn got into Clint Bowyer, who slammed the inside wall. Kyle Busch then turned around Harvick in turn 1. After the race finished, Harvick wanted to get Kyle Busch out of his car. When that didn't happen, Harvick went to Busch's car and threw a punch inside Busch's driver window, but Busch then drove off, and Busch's car pushed Harvick's number 29 car into the pit row wall. It's honestly insane to think about a driver using their car as a weapon, but that's exactly what it looked like. Tempers were absolutely through the roof, and both drivers were fined $25,000 and placed on probation for 4 races, including the All-Star race. Harvick later recounted the incident, saying, "I recall my shoulder still hurting because as I went in to punch him in the head, he decided to take off in his car. Right here, he knew he was going to get punched in the head. He decided that I'm not going to get punched in the head." Boris said versus Greg Biffle, 2011. And then we have the bizarre case of Boris said versus Greg Biffle at Watkins Glen in 2011. On the final lap of the hell of a good sour cream dips at the Glen, Said was involved in a collision with Biffle's teammate David Reagan, which ended with David Rudiman flipping over into the guardrails. Post-race, Said and Biffle had a garage confrontation in which Biffle reportedly took a swing at Said and then gestured profanely at him. Said tried to attack Biffle physically, only to be held back by crew members from multiple teams. But it was Said's post-race interview that really went viral. He apologized for wrecking Reagan, but then went absolutely ballistic about Biffle, saying, "I'm more upset with Greg Biffle. He is the most unprofessional little scaredy cat I've ever seen in my life. He won't even fight me like a man. So if someone texts me his address, I'll go see him Wednesday at his house and show him what he really needs. He needs a friggin' whoopin', and I'm going to give it to him." Said continued his rant, threatening that Biffle would show up at a race with a black eye one of these days. NASCAR investigated the incident, but no penalties were given, with Biffle and Said later settling their dispute with a phone call. And that's our look at NASCAR's wildest confrontations, when big personalities, high stakes, and pure adrenaline collide to create unforgettable moments. Which of these NASCAR meltdowns do you think was the most justified? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this dive into NASCAR's most explosive moments, smash that subscribe button right now to catch all our upcoming videos. And don't forget to hit that bell icon too. That way you'll be notified the second our new content drops.